Hello friends, hope all of you are doing good. In today's session, we are going to learn about exception handling in Java. So what is an exception? We know many a times when we write a program, we are expecting about some errors or some exceptions which can occur, some state which our program will break. Where we don't want to break our program in that scenarios. Say for example, you are trying to access a file where the file is not available. The same way, you are trying to divide a number by 0. All these status is something like an unexpected issues in the programming which will happen. Now, Java has introduced that exception handling in this kind of stage where you are trying to access a file and the file is not available, you can handle that exception. There are 3 types of exception handling or 3 types of exceptions, which are checked exceptions, unchecked exceptions and errors. Let's see how these exceptions are getting created. An exception have a throwable exception class at the top as inheritance. So the parent class is a throwable one, and there is 2 classes which are extending this throwable class is exception and errors. And exception is further again classified into runtime exception, class not found exception, SQL exception and IO exception. In this, runtime exceptions are again classified into arithmetic exception, null pointer exception, index out of range exception. These are some exceptions which is extended. When I say these exceptions, all these are classes which is coming in a hierarchy. On the other hand, errors comes with stack overflow error, virtual machine error and out of memory error. So these are some errors which you can consider, which extends the class error. Now, what is the checked exception and unchecked exception? What is checked exception, unchecked exception and errors? Errors, what we saw under the errors, what errors class, whatever comes in is called errors. Whatever comes under runtime exception is called unchecked exceptions, because those exceptions are not sure it will happen. Unchecked exceptions are the exceptions which comes under runtime exception, like null pointer exception, array index out of bound exception, and rest of the exceptions which is extending the exception class is called checked exceptions. For example, IO exception, input output exception. We know or we should expect there can be an exception which can occur when we try to receive an input from a user where the user is not entering an input. Okay, so that's about the exceptions and its classifications. So checked exception, unchecked exception and errors. It is so simple that you remember errors comes under the errors class which is extending the throwable, and all the exceptions which is comes under runtime exception which is extending an exception and that exception is extending throwable are called unchecked exceptions, and every other exceptions which is extending from the exception class are checked exceptions. Now let's learn about the implementation of the exception handling using the keywords try, catch, finally, throw and throws. Okay, let's take this training test class which we have. I'm removing all these methods and inheritance tutorial which we have created. Let me just clean up this. Now I have cleaned up the training test Java class. Now let's try to access a file input stream fs equal to new file input stream, where I'm going to give a test.txt file. Okay, whereas I'm going to access this file. Now in this compilation you can see it has shown the file input stream is showing some error. So what is the error? It is actually the file is expected to be present in the class path. If the file is not present, it is supposed to throw an exception. So let me just click this. It is asking two options: add throws declaration. That means if I add this throws declaration into the method signature, the throws basically goes with the method signature. That means this method says to the JVM that this method is going to throw, there may be an exception which is thrown by this particular method. That is what we will be doing by this throws. So now I just did the file not found exception is throwing from this particular class. Let us try this. Run as Java application. What does it display? It is actually the test.txt file is not present in my class path, so it just throwed the error. Now I don't want to throw this file not found exception. So where actually this throws goes is to the calling method. If the main method is called from somewhere, it will be going to that particular method. So let me write it in another method so that we will be understanding in a better way. Public static file reader method. Okay, so this is my file reader method, public static file reader method. It's not going to return anything, giving void. Now I'm copying this entire method, I'm cutting this and pasting it here. Now let me just give the throws declaration to my file reader method. Now I have done this throws into the file reader method. Now let me call this file reader from the main method. Now what the file reader is going to give, so where I'm calling this file reader, it is asking me, it is actually asking me to handle the file not found exception which is thrown by the file reader method. So there is a possibility that file input stream may throw an error, it may not throw an error. Sorry, it may throw an exception or it may not throw an exception, where the file reader calling method, main method, need to handle this. Or what we can do, the main method again can throw this to another method which is calling this. Now I don't want to call this way, and this throws also I'm not going to do. Because what I'm going to do is I'm going to try this line. Say this statement I'm trying, if the try statement is executing this particular file input stream accessing to test.txt file, whereas the test.txt is missing, then what I need to do is I'm going to catch this into the file not found exception. So in this exception I'll catch this, and hence my program will not throw an error, or it will not break abruptly. So I just have an option to print this whether an exception happened, print stack trace, and I'm continuing, say here sys out program executed successfully. Okay, so now this happened. At this line, I am giving the program executed successfully. Let's run this. What happens is, as usual, it didn't figure out the file because the file doesn't exist, but till the last line it executed. Now let us go back to the previous way. What we have done is, we did this comment and we were using throws in the method signature, throws this exception, and we don't need the EX there. Now this guy need to handle this. I'm just not going to give that also. I'm just going to give the main method also throw the exception. Now let us see whether this particular line is going to execute or not. Let me just run this. You see it has, okay. Now you can see it broke the program and it didn't come up to this line. So that is where we need to have a try catch block. If we are supposed to handle the exception in the method where we are running the statement, then we need to use the try catch. Or if that, without that line's execution, without that line successful execution, the rest of the lines also, rest of the statements also going to break. In that case, we should not give the try catch. We can throw this method to the calling method, and that calling method need to handle the exception. Now let me just bring back the try catch block and run it back. It gave me the program executed successfully. I'm not going to give this ex.print stack trace, whereas I'm just going to set a string variable here, string message equal to, okay, let me just put the message as null. Here I'm giving message file found. Okay, now the file found. Otherwise, if it is throwing the exception, it is saying file not found. Okay, successfully, and I would probably give this as message plus message. Okay, now when I run this, if there is no exception happen, it will be, okay, messenger, it will be giving the message file found. Otherwise it is going to give me a file not found exception. Now let me just create the file here with txt file test.txt. So now I got the file test.txt. I'm not going to give any content. Now let us see whether it is going to throw an exception or not. Let me just give Java application. What the message we get is file found. That means this executed this line and it didn't come to this line. Let us give this uncomment and see the console. We didn't get any exception. Now let's rename this file and see test1.txt, and now the file not found exception is going to throw yes, and message we got is file not found. So by handling this exception this way, we are restricting our program's breakage unnecessarily or abruptly or unexpectedly. So we can handle the exceptions this way. Now there is one more statement we use, one more keyword we use with the try catch is finally. What finally does is, irrespective of the exception, whether an exception occurred or not occurred, doesn't matter, the finally will be executing. Say for example, you tried to open a JDBC connection, a database connectivity, or you tried open a file. Now, the file stream is open and in between some exception occurred and it didn't properly close the file stream. In that case, there might be possibility of resource exceptions can occur in your program. So what we need to do is we need to release that files. For that, we need to come to the finally. In case of database connectivity, you open a database connection and you didn't close as there is an exception happened. So you cannot always expect catch block will execute because there is no possibility, there is possibility of exception, but there is not surety of an exception. So we bring the finally block which will execute irrespective of an exception. Whether an exception happen or doesn't happen, the finally block will execute. So let me show you with the finally. I have written a finally system.out.println. I am finally executing command. So now the file not found exception is going to happen because I don't have the file test.txt in the expected place, and it is going to throw an exception, and let's see whether our finally block executing. Yes, it throws the exception and as well as it executed the finally block. Now let's give this test1.txt, that is the file which is existing. Let's run this. Now also no exception happened, then it executed the finally block, then only it went to the file found message block. Okay, so that is about finally. Now when you use throw, that is the fifth one. Now we have learned about the keywords try, catch, throws, and finally now comes throw. What we are going to do is, I just want to notify something. Say for example, some issue happened. I just want to throw an exception. Say I should write like throw new exception. Inside that I can give a message new unreported exception. So now I give this throw new exception and it is not handled here. Now what we can do, we have to catch this as well surrounding to the try block. So this means this is conditional. When you are checking manually some condition and you want to throw some exception in between your program. Say for example, you were expecting a name and name not found exception you want to throw. You can use this. Now also you can extend the exception and make your own custom exceptions as well. Now here, irrespective of the case, when it reaches to this line, it is going to throw an exception, and let's see which catch block is going to execute. Here is two catch blocks. One is file not found exception catch block and the other one is the exception catch block. Let's see which one is going to execute. Sorry, I didn't save the file. There is some error. Yeah, okay. The message is, I need to give, it is in the exception block executed. Sorry, exception block executed, or the file not found executed. That's all. The error resolved now. That compilation error resolved now. Now let me run this. So this is my error which I thrown, manual error, and I gave the message new unreported exception and it is executing. I am finally executing, and the message it shows is exception block executed. Now let's change this file1 to file, so that the file not found exception will happen at this line, and it is supposed to execute this, and it will not go to the exception class. Let's see what is happening now. Now when I executed, it is went to file not found exception and it executed the finally, and the message also printed as file not found. In this session, we have learned about how to handle exceptions and errors in Java. Also, we saw the execution and implementations of different types of exceptions in the coding. Hope you have enjoyed today's session. Feel free to ask your doubts in the comment section. We are happy to help you. If you are not subscribed to this channel, subscribe now so that you will be receiving new video notifications in your YouTube. Thank you very much for watching the video.